From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 35. I'm excited for today, not only because this is an old friend, but also because it's a guy who's at the front lines of the data revolution in baseball. He's responsible for taking the information from the front office and really making it usable for the players on the field. And I think all too often we hear about the collection of data, but really it's the dissemination of that information to the guys on the field that makes the biggest difference. So I think we're in for a real treat with this guest. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. It's an all-in-one superfood supplement with 75 whole food sourced ingredients to support your body's nutritional needs across 5 critical areas: energy, immunity, gut health, hormonal support, and healthy aging. I'm an avid user of Athletic Greens myself, in spite of the fact that I tend to be a supplement minimalist. To me, this is a product that is much more like whole food nutritional insurance as opposed to a true supplement. The ingredients have been carefully selected at the highest quality, most natural source. You get essential vitamins and minerals, digestive enzymes, prebiotics, probiotics, and that's the zero compromise approach from the company. It's plant-based, sourced from whole foods at the highest quality, so you won't find harmful chemicals, artificial colors or flavors, preservatives, or added sugar. Really, it's perfect for folks who are gluten and dairy-free, paleo, keto, vegan-friendly, great for people who are intermittent fasting, all that fun stuff. Personally, I love it for obviously our athletes who don't get enough nutritional benefits from fruits and vegetables because they don't eat enough. So it's a way to kind of plug in holes in diets. But also, I really like it for our college and professional athletes who may have complex travel schedules where quality food options aren't always at hand. On a personal level, I'm a husband, father of 3, and an entrepreneur. We split our time between 2 states, and I'm also still an avid lifter. So life is inherently crazy, and it can be stressful, and sleep deprivation is definitely something that we encounter. So I rely on Athletic Greens for part of my immune support, and believe firmly that it's made a big difference in keeping me healthy in spite of how crazy our lifestyle is. They've got a great offer in place. If you head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey, they'll get you 20 free travel packets with your purchase. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, CRESSEY, and you can claim your special offer. Today's guest was born and raised in New Hampshire, where he established himself as a nationwide standout, which led to a college baseball career at Stanford. As an outfielder at Stanford, he was a 2-time All-American, set the school record for career runs scored, and established the College World Series record for career hits. At the completion of his Stanford degree in 2004, he was drafted by the Chicago Cubs, and he went on to make his major league debut with them in 2007. He wound up playing 8 seasons in Major League Baseball for the Cubs, Rays, A's, and Minnesota Twins. He also played for Team Israel in the 2017 World Baseball Classic. Upon his retirement, he was hired to serve as the Major League Player Information Coordinator for the Philadelphia Phillies. As a young kid, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and he's done some tremendous charitable work with raising funds and awareness for these populations. Prior to his retirement, he was also a CSP athlete at our Florida facility, and he's become a great family friend over the years. Please welcome to the show, Sam Fuld. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
I am excited to have you because you're a CSP veteran. We are in the process of raising your jersey to the rafters as a storied alum of our programs, but you've moved on to even bigger and better things. So I think that's maybe a great place to start. So we obviously know you as a Major League Baseball player, and I know you as a dad and a husband and all that fun stuff too, but let's start with your current role of Player Information Coordinator with the Philadelphia Phillies. How did you wind up in that role, and what does the job entail?
Sure. So I guess it goes back to the off season of, going into 17, and when I was recovering from surgery and still had aims of playing that year in 2017. And so my agent spoke to Matt Clintack about, opportunity with the Phillies, and, it was under the assumption that I was going to be, available to play in 2017. And so the conversation just sort of ended between my agent and Matt as like, oh, by the way, I don't know if Sam's going to be done in 5 years or 5 months, but whenever he's done, would love to talk about sort of next steps beyond playing. So that he told me that, and I sort of kept that in the back of my mind. And in the middle of 2017 is when I kind of decided to hang him up and realized I wasn't quite ready to pursue, keep my playing career going. So Philly just seemed, without knowing Matt or really anybody else in the organization, I just sort of I recognized a really good organization, and did research on the group, and from a geographic standpoint, just sort of made a lot of sense. Having family close by, and having the 34 kids that we have, it's always nice to be near family. So it seemed like a good fit, and so I just struck up a conversation with Matt, and got to know other members of the organization, and by November, so just about 2 years ago, took the job. And so it was a job that kind of Matt crafted himself, and was really didn't exist really. You may have been different forms of it in the form of like a quality control coach maybe, but the idea was to be, in a nutshell, like a liaison between our analytics group and players and coaches. So that sort of bridge or translator, to sort of take all the information that we get, StatCast and otherwise, and make it usable and relatable to players and coaches. So it entails a lot. And, sort of took it with a sort of broad scope, and some of it is like individual player development, some of it is sort of in-game strategy stuff, and a lot of it is like sort of developing coaches. Like we've had some really good educated coaches, some sort of data savvy coaches, but I've really enjoyed that part of it too, just getting them as educated as possible.
Do you think it was kind of a scenario of, you hire the person realizing it's a bright guy with a wide ranging skill set who's played the game and is very educated, and then you say, all right, let's find a role for the person? Or do you think it was something where they saw a fundamental need with like the surge in data in baseball, and they were looking for the right person to help disseminate that information correctly, or maybe a little bit of both?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. I do. I think I was wide open. Like I didn't know what I wanted. I remember just 2 years ago thinking like every part of baseball is interesting to me. Like, the like training aspect of it, the mental side of it, player development, scouting. It's all interesting. So I felt like I was sort of happy going in any kind of direction. But I think Matt identified I was sort of like a math nerd, and like that part of the game was always interesting to me. And he also at the same time recognized that this was an important role going forward with this sort of like onslaught of data, and without somebody there to help implement it in the right way, I think it's sort of like a useless part of the game.
Absolutely. Were there growing pains? I mean, I know personally, having like played around with True Media, and even just, you can go on Brooks Baseball or Baseball Savant, you can really get lost in that stuff very, very quickly. Did you find yourself up at 3 a.m. staring at spreadsheets and stuff like everybody else has in that role?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It is a dirty rabbit hole. It is a great rabbit hole, but True Media alone is just like, you can get lost in there. So I tried to at least take notes when I was going down those holes, and not make it fruitless, and also recognize that my kids were going to wake me up in 3 hours, and then I should probably just like set a little curfew for myself, a True Media curfew. But it's cool, and it's like I felt like I kind of had to do that to catch up, and to just sort of like prepare myself to be good at my job. For the first few months, I was lucky to take the job in November and not really like interface with players and coaches until like February. So I at least got those 3 months or so to learn as much as possible, and hopefully come prepared with something.
Absolutely. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So during your MLB career, you obviously played for several organizations, but the two that kind of stand out amongst your resume are the Rays and the A's, who were early adopters from an analytics standpoint. Obviously the A's were the root of the Moneyball discussion, and the Rays now have continuously outperformed a low payroll in the context of the game. So were those things like in that time, were you acutely aware of that front office focus in the day-to-day when you were a player, or was it something that you felt like stayed in the front office? So I guess in other words, did you find them to be using all that information more for player evaluation and game prep as opposed to actual player development?
Yeah, I think it definitely leaned more on the evaluation side. I think I got glimpses of it, when I was in Tampa. I can remember a couple instances where, I was told, for instance, when I first got there, I started off really hot with them and then hit like this horrid slump. I remember going like 3 for 50 or something, like horrible. And I remember them I think it was Andrew Friedman himself coming down and just being like, look, and Derek Shelton was a part of it too, our hitting coach at the time. And them just saying like, you know what, it's, there's a lot of just bad luck here. And that was sort of a very basic example of them using data. I'm sure it wasn't just them like, pulling it out of thin air. I think it was probably rooted in some kind of data, like not StatCast data. Obviously this was like 2011, but it was an example of like using data to help me at least feel better about myself.
Yeah.
Which is a big part of my job anyways, like identifying, either a true struggle or bad luck. And that was an example of them just trying to identify some bad luck. So I think it existed to a degree, but by and large, it felt like, player evaluation. Cause like the same guys were going from Tampa to Oakland. It was like at one point, John Jaso and Stephen Vogt and I think Dan Johnson had floated it back and forth. And so it was like all these Rays connections that like didn't feel like an accident.
And I'm curious, when you look back on your own career, obviously that was the time when it was more player evaluation and, it's shifted remarkably towards player development, either in the context of whether it's developing a new pitch or, changing a swing pattern or, taking what you have and having a different approach. Now it's a player development approach. When you look back at your own career, could a player information coordinator have helped you with the actual player development aspect of things?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I guess how,
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think, one thing I didn't really do like throughout my career was like know myself. I sort of had guesses about what my strengths were, but, there were guesses and I don't think, part my fault. I know looking back that the information was available, but I never really even looked at like my own heat map, like where do I do damage? And I had thoughts, but I never got it sort of solidified by fact. So I think that alone would have helped me. Maybe I would have stopped hunting fastballs down and away and just looked for a heater middle in. If that was, looking back, like I probably did more damage on heaters middle in than I did down and away. But a lot of times I think I probably looked in the wrong spots without knowing exactly who I was. Or maybe I would have tried to hit the ball in the air a little bit more. Like my whole career, I was kind of that guy who was told, hit ground balls and line drives.
Yeah.
Don't ever hit the ball in the air. But I bet if somebody had shown me that, my expected wOBA was a lot higher when I hit the ball in the air than it was on all those 4-3 ground outs, I bet I would have shifted my focus a little bit.
In fairness, I think your 12 career home runs went really far. I didn't pull numbers on them, but so
Yeah.
these are always. So I always joke. I had Lomo on here, and Will Middlebrooks is going to come on. We've talked to Joe Panic, and what's interesting is you interview a hitter. They always have to be kind of like tactful about their responses. Like you're not going to have a guy come up and be like, "Yeah, I can't hit heaters up," or like if you throw me a right-on righty changeup, it's the worst day of my life. Like they're very secretive about that, and obviously I understand why. But in hindsight, as a retired athlete, where were your weak spots? Who absolutely owned you? And looking back, do you think that there are bits of information that could have helped you in those?
That's a great question. Yeah, I have no problem admitting all my faults. It was throw the baseball, and that was a good way of getting me out. Like curveballs. I mean, I hunted heaters, and I know a lot of guys do, but I really sat heater until 2 strikes. And back, I'd say more so, like say 10 years ago than now. I just sort of fit the stereotype of a guy that was going to get a lot of heaters, so it just didn't make sense for me to look for anything other than that until I needed to. And, I remember like playing Houston when they changed regimes and like with Jason Castro behind the dish, and it's clearly like a change in game planning using more information. I remember getting like a lot of breaking balls, and I remember thinking, oh, they're actually reading my like a scouting report here. They see that I'm 1 for my last 30 in curveballs. That's why I'm getting 4 curveballs in a row. So yeah, I think like it's such a chess match. So maybe knowing that, I think I felt like within the context of within the at bat, I was making an adjustment going, oh, Houston knows that I can't hit a curveball. Maybe I'll sit on a curveball and at least have a better chance, on it than if I wouldn't otherwise.
Would you agree with like the general consensus? I mean, the technology is very much biased towards pitchers, right? And the nature of baseball is biased towards pitchers because the hitter's responding to a pitcher. Do you feel like that it's a massive asymmetry in terms of who analytics has helped, that hitters have been kind of left behind while pitchers have had all the good stuff? And do you see that if you agree, do you see that changing anytime soon?
Yeah, I think yes and no. Definitely when you have the ball in your hand and you can make decisions, it's way easier to lean on data. I don't dispute that one bit. I think hitters are starting to get like tilt the scales a little bit. I think by just having a better understanding of what a good swing is and what in certain ways to practice to put yourself in a good position. So I think that's sort of how the hitters have caught up to a degree. I think you can certainly use information as a hitter from either an advanced standpoint or a sort of know thyself standpoint, but I think the real advantage is just getting some really, I'd say in the last 5-10 years, the swing revolution stuff has really helped them. And I know it gets a lot of criticism publicly, but I think it has absolutely helped hitters put themselves in better position to succeed.
I'm curious. So obviously I'm in the private sector, and I think we get a lot of guys that come to us. Maybe there's a little bit of a velvet rope around the business. Like the only guys you see here are, guys who really want there. They want to leverage every bit of expertise they can get. And, so we very openly share data, whatever we can get our hands on with our players. If we know that they're bought in, and we do our best to disseminate that information correctly so they can use it. But I do know there's some hesitation in certain organizations about sharing data with players. I've even heard stories about, organizations where minor leaguers are fined if they ask for TrackMan data or, try to access it on their own because they're so concerned about overwhelming players. Do you feel like that's actually a legitimate concern, or is that unfounded?
I do. I mean, I think like everything, it has to be individualized. So I think everybody, certain players can handle certain amounts of information. I mean, you have to think, like you can't not think. You want to be as simple-minded as possible. But if you are, let's say you're a 22-year-old now who's been exposed to TrackMan data since they were 15, and they've been exposed to, say, heat maps and, count by count tendencies and all this information they're just comfortable with, then I think you can kind of go to the next level and start getting really detailed with them. But if you're somebody who's 35 and has been, see ball, hit ball, and, I want to take a few flips before the game and I'm ready to go and I don't want to know anything else, then you just can't, you can't overwhelm them with information, and it's going to be kind of worthless. So you just have to, I feel like my job, half of my job is playing psychologist and trying to figure out what's going to be the best approach with each guy. So some guys, myself included, I feel like I probably overanalyzed too much. And I think whatever information, whether it was external information, like trying to guess a pitch coming, or internal, thinking about my own swing, I think it probably got in the way to a degree with myself.
Do you think it's also like somewhat cultural? Like I've always heard stories about like, you have players or support staff that just refer to like the nerds in the front office, so that there's always like a level of I guess blocking of the information getting to the people who want. So if you get a veteran who's really, really down on the idea of looking to this stuff as an asset, like does that make your job more challenging when you have those situations? Or do you feel like those people are phasing out of baseball on the whole?
I think they're phasing out a little. Yeah, for sure. I think, it's a legit, problem. I mean, it's a challenge, I should say. Like it's especially if you're, coming into an environment that is not accustomed to that kind of thing. It's sort of like change management is a big part of this.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. It's like every year there's just a little bit more open-mindedness to the stuff and a little bit more kind of integrating between front office and in the clubhouse. But yeah, if you've got a player that is a veteran player who's sort of like anti-analytics, it definitely doesn't make things easier. That's for sure.
No doubt. And I'm actually really curious to get this next take. So literally last night I was like packing up stuff for today for the girls for lunch, and MLB Network on in the background, and they had Al Leiter and Dan O'Dowd on, and they were talking about like how the learning curve for new MLB managers is probably lower than ever before. So they were talking about David Ross being hired by the Cubs, and some of the other younger hires that we've seen in not too recently, but basically because the amount of information they need is provided for the front office. So instead of having to work on hunches and intuition and things that you would have acquired out of years and years of sitting in the dugout and watching games and building a sample size, they comment that may be one of the reasons why we're seeing so many young, recently retired players who are becoming managers. It becomes more about relating to players and managing personalities than maybe strategy. Do you think there's validity to that, or is there a lot more to it? I mean, you obviously played for a lot of managers and been around young managers too.
Yeah. I do think there's validity to that. Absolutely. Yeah. I think you can kind of like get further down the road, with a few pieces of paper in front of you instead of leaning on 30 years of experience, to make those decisions. So I totally see that and agree with it. I think you can always like dig deeper though. You can always kind of try to maximize your strategy, your in-game strategy, your lineup decisions. You can try to maximize those even more, right? So you might be getting to like the 10-yard line with a couple pieces of paper, but maybe you want to get down to the 5-yard line and get even, peel back another layer. And so like you want to, like, let's say we've got an Adam Hazley versus Sean Rodriguez decision, like, who to pinch hit. And it's, let's say Max Fried's out there with like this huge curveball, and traditionally, like you would say, or the information that you have on hand says that, the lefty-righty matchup is better. Sean Rodriguez is a better matchup, but maybe you just try to become even more granular and go, oh, Adam Hazley actually kills left-handed curveballs, right? So I think you're always able to sort of peel back another layer, and it doesn't. Yeah, I think it's like you can get to a certain point right now quicker, but you're always going to try to get further. And so I think like it's a long way of saying it is easier, but it's still really hard because now the expectations are that you kind of maximize even more your strategy.
Maybe like a career development question detour here. I know when we had Ryan Flaherty, well, Maine and New Hampshire, and you guys both have trained alongside. When we had Ryan on, he talked about just how much he learned from just being in the dugout next to Buck Showalter all those years, and trying to hang out by the managers. And, obviously Ryan's a guy who I'm sure will be thrown into managerial discussions at some level when he decides to hang him up. And you're already a name that's been, thrown into that discussion. You've obviously a guy who was ascended quickly into a front office / coaching role. Do you think there's certain things that people can do or players can do during their career that set them up for, a better post-baseball career in front office or managerial work? Like when you look back on what got you to be a Phillies front office member at a young age, what do you think some of those important competencies you picked up on were?
Yeah, I think like you take advantage of the resources that you have around you. So like being curious is just so crucial. Looking back on it, I really valued all the time that I spent in Tampa and Oakland and Chicago and Minnesota, and just getting to lean on all the great resources that I had, like, teammates, coaches, front office alike. So take advantage of that. I think it's really cool. You bring up Flaherty hanging out with Buck, but I think like, yeah, I look back at, I just thought about, the couple days off that Harp had this year. He was sort of sitting by, Cap and sitting by Rob Thompson, our bench coach, and just trying to soak in like the decision making that goes on from a managerial perspective. I thought, man, that's like really cool. I'm pretty sure you don't want to manage when you're done playing.
Yeah.
You're going to be, you're going to be stepping into the Hall of Fame and doing whatever you want. I doubt it's going to be managing, but I thought that was pretty cool. Like he's just curious. And I think more players can do that. I think the better equipped they'll be, whether it's being curious with your coaches or curious with front office.
I feel like that's something I always noticed with you too. Like you always wanted to ask the why of why we were doing things in the weight room, and that's even kind of been something that's carried over to how you view the analytics. I know you and Brian Kaplan talk a lot about just how the physical competencies relate to what you see on TrackMan data or anything like that. So, that curiosity has to carry over across different disciplines. It's not just what's happening on a baseball field.
Yeah, 100%. I tried to, I sort of balanced when training with you guys, like asking too many questions and not getting like maximizing my workout. But
I was asking you questions about how to handle having 27 children. So you set me up for success.
Yeah, we helped each other. Yeah, for sure.
So where do you see like this baseball information age going next? Like, what's the next frontier? And just as importantly, how do coaches make sure the information translate to actual player development?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's still a ton of room for growth, medically and mentally. Those are kind of the two that pop into mind. Like, I know, people like yourself are doing a great job of sort of really improving the industry from a medical standpoint, from a, both a player health and a player performance standpoint. I still think there's a ton of room to grow there. And just getting the right, getting better educating hitting coaches, pitching coaches, and better educating them to some of the things that they can do the player can do from a training standpoint to maybe allow them to execute a change, better and more efficiently. So I think that's a big, potential room for growth. And I think on the mental side, like, we will never figure out, like how our brains work. But I think we can get a little bit closer to figuring that out. And I just think about like the ups and downs that every player goes through, within the course of a season. And I still truly believe that so many are driven by the neck up. And I know that we are really, really attempting, to better figure out what is the cause of that. And I think we're getting there from a technology standpoint. We can hook up brain sensors to guys now when they hit and get a better understanding of brain activity. And I just think that, like, if you can limit sort of mental slumps by 20%, you've made a player a lot better. And if we can do that on a more widespread basis, I think the industry will really improve.
Absolutely. I'm gonna shift gears on you and talk about your playing career, because we talked about the front office guy more than anything else. And I'm curious because you were a kid from New Hampshire who went to Stanford as a position player, and you don't see a whole lot of position players that come from the Northeast, because of the weather. You don't see 15, 90 mile per hour arms every season like the kids in Florida do. It's really, really hard to evaluate position players from New England. So I guess my question was, what was the secret for you to get on that radar, to actually wind up at Stanford in the first place as a guy from New Hampshire?
Yeah, you know what? I don't know if I had a secret to it. I played, I played American Legion baseball in the summer, and I played in Phillips Exeter, where we played 15 or 16 games a year, and it was, I think, I was lucky in that Stanford had, they have to recruit nationally, and I think they probably had some connections to scouts like just across the country. So I was, I played in the area code games. Yep. I was actually really lucky. I was, my best friend growing up was Chris Gale, who now works for the Indians, and his dad was Rich Gale, who was a Major League Baseball pitcher and a pitching coach in the big leagues of the Red Sox. And he pulled a couple strings to allow this area code game tryout to happen.
Yeah.
And that's like, otherwise I was not going to this area code game.
Yeah.
And so Chris and I traveled down to Rutgers University one day in the summer and tried out for this team, and we both made it. And that allowed us to go out to Long Beach and be exposed to, obviously, like a huge number of professional and college scouts. So that was, I think that had a pretty big part in it. But honestly, I felt like, anytime I stepped on the field, I was playing really hard, and I played with a chip on my shoulder. Like, I was a kid from New Hampshire who had something to prove. So, that's it. I practiced baseball as much as I could. I would, pull down the cage in the UNH field house or at the Exeter field house and have my dad throw BP to me all the time, and I was always trying to be a better baseball player. But I played other sports too, and I think definitely attribute a good amount of my like athleticism in the outfield to having played basketball and soccer throughout my youth.
That's good to know. And well, I'm even building on that. Like in 2000, I'm reading this off Wikipedia. In 2001, as a freshman, you batted .357 as the team's leadoff hitter. In the postseason, you hit .396. Then as a sophomore, you led the Pac-10 in hits, broke Stanford's single season record while batting .375. You led the conference in total bases. Like we could go on and on. I'm curious. So you didn't just make it to Stanford. Like you raked as a freshman, right? So what allows you to hit the ground running going to a larger environment like that? Because let's be honest, the at bats weren't there. And then even on top of that, like that was in an era where you would just like go into the field house, set the pitching machine on 95 and take balls at 45 feet lined at you. So what was the secret to you?
Yeah, my dad, I'd like to think my dad's a pretty good BP thrower, but he was, looking back through like 38-mile-an-hour cutters, probably. But
sounds like my kind of guy.
Right. Sounds familiar. So, some of it was just kind of like ignorance. I just felt like I've got nothing to lose here. I wasn't intimidated. I think there were a couple of experiences looking back that probably gave me some confidence, like whether it was conscious or not. Just playing in the area code games and like having success there and facing Mike Davern, who threw 94 miles an hour then as a 17-year-old, like, and having some success. I think like at least I wasn't showing up to Stanford totally intimidated. I played AAU baseball like when I was 14 and 15, and I played in these national tournaments and at least got some idea of how I stacked up on a national basis. So I would definitely recommend like kind of at least putting yourself in a position where you get some sort of context. So if you do make a move like going from New Hampshire to a Pac-10 school at the time, I think that probably gave me more confidence than I knew at the time. But yeah, I just didn't have any fear and felt like I was one of the guys, even though I had maybe a tenth of the reps that my buddy Carlos Quentin had growing up in San Diego,
Absolutely. Now, if you, in spite of the fact that you obviously put up really good numbers for 3 years at Stanford, your junior year rolls around and you were taken in the 24th round by the Cubs. And a lot of people at the time, attributed that to like a bias against shorter players. And obviously you were drafted by the Cubs the next year after, kind of a shoulder injury, which derailed the draft stock a little bit. But when I look at that junior year, I'm like, your numbers do not align with someone who's a 24th rounder. Do you think that, and I know there's always the question of like Stanford guys, do they want to play baseball? Do they want to go work for hedge funds, whatever it may be? Do you think that baseball's past that bias against height, guys who aren't tall now that Altuve and Pedroia have gone out and done their things?
I think so. Yeah, I really do. I mean, does it still exist? Like maybe to a degree.
Especially in pitchers.
Yeah. I think definitely there's so many undersized position players that are just some of the best in the game. Like, it's Bregman and it's Jose Ramirez and, Mookie Betts. Like none of these guys are big physical guys. And, so I think, and then you've seen it in the draft recently, like, Madrigal, Nick Madrigal getting taken second over, whatever it was, top 5 overall. And, he's tiny, and I think that's really cool. So, yeah, it probably existed more 16 years ago than it does now. But yeah, I think that was, it fueled me. I knew it. Like, I had obstacles growing up in New Hampshire and being type 1 diabetic and being short. Like, those were all these things that gave me like a little bit added motivation all the time. So I just kind of used it to fuel me.
All right. And then what advice would you give to those smaller players out there who are trying to overcome those objections, whether it's a pitcher, position player, anybody? Like what hurdles do they have to get over that the guy who's 6'4", 220 doesn't have to face?
Yeah, just use it to your advantage, like play with a chip on your shoulder, really. And that's all you can do, in some ways it's fun and it's in some ways easier to be the underdog, I think whether it's from a team standpoint or an individual standpoint, like baseball is pretty fun when you're an underdog and you succeed. When I got to the big leagues, like it felt so good because it was like I had to overcome a lot, and I think obviously it feels good for everybody to make their big major league debut, but if you're a 6'5", 230 first rounder, it probably feels like a little less good than it feels for a 5'9" lefty outfielder from New Hampshire. So I think it's just use it to your advantage and play with a chip on your shoulder.
We had AJ Pollock on a while back, and AJ's obviously a New England guy who made it to the big leagues as a position player from the Northeast, who's also known for his outfield defense. But that was kind of your MO. What was the line? 2/3 of the world is covered by water, and the other third is covered by Sam Fuld. So, what are some of the recommendations you would make to young players who want to prioritize defensive development, particularly as outfielders? You mentioned playing multiple sports at a young age.
Yeah.
What about in the actual skill aspect of baseball? Were there practices that you went through on a regular basis to prepare?
Yeah, I think I say this all the time. It's really about getting game-like reps during batting practice. There's no better substitute. I think it's not easy to do, but it is the best way to get yourself better as an outfielder. There's no other way. We're getting better at simulating that from a practice standpoint. So we even do that where we'll put a coach, myself included, in the box and have sort of either take flips and hit it to outfielders to try to replicate a ball off the bat in a game. But there's nothing like BP to do that. You read swings, you read pitch location, read angle of bat through the zone, you read all these things, depth of contact. You get all this information that you just wouldn't otherwise get, especially from the corners. And if you take that seriously and we're talking about 15 minutes of focus, you do that, and sort of play these things out. So even if ball gets by you and it's, 5 feet to your left, play it out and learn how to play the ball off the fence and learn all these little things that you wouldn't otherwise do in a sort of drill setting. I really believe that. And I think the other thing is watch baseball. It's amazing what you can do from just watching baseball and not just 2-second highlights, but legitimately watch baseball in 3-hour games, or if you can condense a bunch of at-bats into a shorter time period, I would highly recommend that. I think back to how much baseball I've watched as a kid, just watching the Red Sox every night, and you don't know it at the time, but you're sort of getting all these reps, these mental reps by watching baseball, and you see all these swings and where batted balls end up. And I think that I truly believe that had something to do with my sort of ability to get to a spot and know where that baseball is going to land.
I think the other thing that's I don't want to say it's interesting, maybe doesn't do it justice, but you're a type 1 diabetic, and the thing that I never saw you eat junk food. I never saw you put unhealthy things in your body. And was that kind of a blessing in disguise for you? Is that from a young age you had to be so cognizant of what in your system, how you fueled yourself, that nutritionally it almost long term became an advantage for you?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. Again, kind of I tried to use the disease to my advantage the best I could, and I was sort of I was probably a pretty disciplined 10-year-old when I was diagnosed anyway. But it definitely did not allow me to abandon any of that discipline, and whether it was from a training standpoint or a nutrition standpoint, I certainly had my moments. And when your blood sugar goes low, it's hard to really fight impulses. You want to take anything with any sugar near you, and you're like my 9-year-old boy, just devour anything in sight. But for the most part, I was pretty disciplined, and I think it definitely helped me be in shape and just be a better baseball player.
I like it. All right, so now we get to go to the lightning round. This is the fun stuff. So the first question, you've heard the podcast, so we asked this to everybody. What advice would you give to a teenage Sam Fuld?
Oh man, I would say it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, but just be curious, ask more questions. I think I was a pretty introverted kid, high school kid especially, and be confident to ask really curious questions that I probably didn't do a better job of in real life.
Absolutely. And in fact, you became so curious once you got to pro ball that the first time you came to see me, do you remember what the drive was like?
I remember, it was the Hurricane Sandy drive.
Yes,
I remember
it was.
exactly what my Honda Accord almost flew into a building on the way to your gym. Yeah.
You persevered a hurricane because you were so curious. That's a good
That's
lesson
right.
to all the young. What about minor league Sam Fuld?
Relax. Yeah, I stressed a lot. I did my whole career, but I think it was especially just in the Cubs system, not knowing where I stood within the organization. I was constantly worried, and I wish I had known that I would at least may have a decent major league career.
What about if you had to give one book recommendation of anything you've read over the last year, what would it be?
Oh, I read a really good Adam Grant book called Originals.
Yep, great book.
Yeah.
Adam Grant's got a lot of good stuff. Give and Take is another good one that he wrote.
Yes.
So there you go. All right, so this is another one. So currently, so for those who don't know at home, we actually have a fantasy football league among Cressey Sports Performance current and retired athletes. So it started off as me and 9 pro guys, and now the official side of the league is 6 pros and 4 Joes. You've ascended to the Joe category. We've got Chris Volstad, who owns a brewery. Me, we've got Radley Haddad, who's Yankees bullpen catcher, as the other Joe in that. You're currently in first place, and you're the high scorer with a record of 8-1. Do you think there's any correlation between fantasy football success and front office proficiency?
100%. Yes. Well, no, because if you checked my history in my other league, you would be like, oh God, this guy, you would never want to hire this guy in a front office. This is horrible. So I would like to take credit for the stuff I've learned from the front office, but I think it's more like I drafted the Stanford guy named McCaffrey, and I've really had good success.
That worked out all right for you.
Yeah.
Nice. Before we wrap up, I know you run a camp for kids with type 1 diabetes every year, and it's a huge success. Tell the listeners a little bit more about it and how they can get involved or donate.
Sure. So it's been something, I started it in 2012, so this will be my 9th camp this February. It's every February. We do it the weekend after Super Bowl weekend. It's in Tampa at the University of South Florida. It's a type 1 diabetes sports camp for kids that are 7 to 17. We offer a ton of different sports. All the coaches and counselors at the camp are type 1 diabetic. A lot of them have reached really good heights as an athlete. We've got professional tennis player, professional basketball player, a former NFL player, all type 1 diabetic. So a ton of good role models and a weekend of like really good experiences for kids and parents too. We hold a parent seminar on the weekend, and it is a highlight of my year every weekend. It really is. And we do a lot of great things. We've partnered with University of South Florida's Diabetes Center. It started when I was playing in Tampa, and it's just been a really, really cool experience that I want to keep going forever, or at least until the disease is cured. So it's Sam Fuld, T1DSportsCamp.org. You'll get information on the camp and how to donate there.
Right on. And you're semi-active on Twitter. It's at SamFold5, and your Twitter account actually links directly to that page as well. So folks can check you out there. So Sam, thanks so much for coming on, man. It's always good to catch up, but it's even cooler to catch up when we mix in all the good expertise and lessons for everybody at the same time.
Yeah, no doubt. Appreciate you having me, Eric.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions. Just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.